Bows, TKOs, yeah. Bows, TKOs, we got bows, TKOs, yeah. Bows, TKOs, we got bows, TKOs, yeah. Bows, TKOs.
Bows and TKOs. We are live, episode 71, coming at you from the valley on this Wednesday evening. Beautiful day in the desert, cooler weather, perfect temperatures. Your boy is happy about it. Again, I'm your host, Shane Gillette, for your weekly MMA podcast, streaming anywhere you get podcasts and videos on YouTube. We have one hell of a show this week. We're going to talk about one fight that has been announced since last episode. Recap the Dana White Contender Series episode 10 finale, the PFL Battle of the Giants card, UFC Fight Night Vegas 99, and preview the much anticipated UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi this coming Saturday morning. Your boy is hyped. So we're just going to jump right into this bad boy because your boy is moving. I have movers coming Saturday. Have to have this thing boxed up. So lots of work. Things that I just hate moving. Let's just say it that way. But a fight that has been announced. We have Machete taking on Nicholas Mota, November 23rd. Decent little scrap. But yeah, nothing really been announced of late. I did expect during the PFL weekend the UFC to announce a bunch of awesome fights. But I guess they really didn't care, and the way the PFL card played out, they probably made the right decision. So sadly, Jake Hadley, who took a couple of short notice fights, taking a couple of L's, he was, I think, a minus 600 favorite this weekend, is no longer with the UFC. He posted on X, aka Twitter, about it and how he really feels about the situation. You know, tough break for Jake Hadley, but he will no longer with the UFC. I'm sure he could come back to the promotion with some good performances. This Friday morning, we have ADXC6, some solid UFCers, and some solid names going at it on the grappling mats in Abu Dhabi as well. We have Tagir Ulanbekov, who I would love to see back in the octagon, taking on Jussier Forminga. That should be a fun scrap. And then we have Rogerio Bontorin taking on Muhammad Mokaev. Originally was scheduled Raul Rosas Jr., there's rumors that maybe the UFC didn't like that idea and pulled them from that match. But we get to see Muhammad Mokaev and Rogerio Bontorin. If you like no-gi grappling. A couple weeks ago on the Contender Series, what a season finale. I really did think the season finished on a very high note. Some fantastic fights and 4 more contracts that were assigned. We had Nick Klein with a round 1 submission via rear naked choke over Geraldo Souza. He earned a contract, pretty slight work for Nick Klein. We had Luis Guerrilli defeating Nick Piccini via split decision. If you've been tracking the Contender Series, Nick Piccini, a former Oklahoma State grappler, a wrestler, Daniel Cormier speaking his praises, fought earlier in the season, got a win, but it was very controversial. I actually did think he lost. So did Dana White and crew. So they made him fight again. Very close, hard-fought, battle fight. Awesome 3-round affair. But he takes the loss, so back to the drawing board. And Luis had took this fight on, I think, 10 days' notice. Performed perfectly, especially after a hard weight cut. So well-deserved by Luis Guerrilli. We had in the featherweight, Yadier Del Valle with the unanimous decision over Antonio Montero. This fight was an absolute war, back-to-back fun fights here, and Yadier was able to earn a contract. We had a very young prospect in the women's side of things, Julieta Martinez with a split decision victory over Leslie Hernandez. She did not get a contract, though. There has been some mixed bag of reviews on this decision, but I do agree with Dana. She is still so young, still very green. It's not going to hurt her to get some fights outside the promotion to prepare herself. She is training at the new Apex in Mexico. I believe that she's even training with Dominic Cruz, but she showed the potential of her very interesting striking skills. I'm sure we will see her in the UFC in the future. And then we had Jonathan McKelliff with a round 1 submission via triangle choke over Mahad Otto to earn a contract. Very solid fights, some high performances, early finishes, some 0 to 100 fights, a little mixed bag for everyone in here. Even the women's fight was pretty back and forth and high volume. So what a way to finish the new season of the Contender Series. And, they're taking a lot of ex-UFC veterans contracts, as we have seen with all the cuts. But on Saturday, we had the PFL Battle of the Giants. Everyone tuning in to see what Francis Ngannou and Hernan Ferreira could do. Well, Francis got an easy takedown, landed some nasty ground and pound pretty quick to make slight work of the big man and Hernan Ferreira. And I was pretty damn positive Francis would get the job done. Although Ferreira's in his mid-30s, technically in his prime, he is still somewhat green when it comes to his pro career in mixed martial arts and the amount of big-time fights Francis has already been into. And with the boxing bouts, I just thought it would be too much for him unless Henan was able to catch him early, and that was not the case. That was probably the exciting part besides the Chris Cyborg, Larissa Pacheco bout. Chris Cyborg somehow pulled off a decision. She was just doing classic Chris Cyborg things, bringing the action, bringing the violence, cutting each other open. She got battered, taken down, grinded out, still somehow captured the victory over the course of 5 rounds against the double champ Larissa Pacheco, who is the younger fighter. And now Chris Cyborg has won an Invicta, Bellator, PFL, the UFC. She is going to be going down as one of the women GOATs. And I did think Larissa would come through, but Chris Cyborg was just too nasty with her striking and her boxing. That was the fight of the night. And the rest of the card was pretty boring. We had Johnny Eblen grapple and wrestle his way to a unanimous decision over Fabian Edwards in the rematch. Not much action there. And then really interesting here, actually, Paul Hughes with a split decision victory over the very talented AJ McKee. AJ tried to wrestle his way to victory. Paul wasn't having it, and Paul looked like the sharper striker. The young prized possession of the PFL. Excited to see what he does next. He's calling for Nurmagomedov for the title already. Will be interesting to see where they go with him next. But, the Apex card, we'll get to it, had a lot of grappling and a lot of decisions, but there wasn't a lot of excitement. I think the Cyborg fight had the most excitement. Just the intrigue of the Francis fight, and then you have to give props to Paul Hughes. Quite a performance, but when he was defending takedowns from AJ McKee the whole fight, it didn't quite make for, a fan favorite affair. But they do have the PFL Championships finally scheduled for November 29th. This will happen in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia as well. We have Brendan Loughnane and Timur Khizriev in the championship. That's probably one of the fights I'm the most excited about, as well as Dakota Dacheva taking on Talia Santos. We get to see how good Dakota is and Timur is against a very good PFL tournament fighter and Brendan Loughnane. We also have Impa Kasaganay taking on Dovlet Yagshamiradov. Magomed Umalatov taking on Shamil Musayev. That should be a fun fight. Veteran Brent Primus and Gadzi Rabadanov. And Denis Goltsov and Oleg Popov. But let's get into what happened in the Apex Fight Night Vegas 99 card. Brutal night for the picks. I went 4-5 in my picks. The first card under 500 in quite some time. Overall, in that 427 wins, 217 losses, 7 no contests or draws. On the year, 234 wins, 132 losses, so a little over 100 still, 4 no contests or draws. So to recap this Apex card, like I said, there was a lot of decisions, a lot of grappling, but I thought, man, Anthony Hernandez and Rob Font really got to show off. The rest of the main card and the Brad Katona, Gene Matsumoto fights were a ton of fun to watch. Back and forth, hard-fought fights. I give this a 5 out of 10, which I think I previewed it a 5 or 6 out of 10 anyways. A good fight that we did not break down. We had Jocelyn Edwards with a round 3 submission via face crank over Tamirez Vidal. Jocelyn Edwards just making slight work, although it did go to round 3. Really looked phenomenal here, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, she still did miss weight, though, which isn't good. But in the prelims, to kick it off, we had Austin Lane with the unanimous decision over Robelis to Spain. This was a fight I picked wrong, and I was so damn close to picking Austin Lane. If you watch episode 70 and how I had previewed this fight, what I thought could happen from a Lane perspective is exactly what happened. And this was all about Lane grappling to Spain, being aggressive but not being able to do much when he got on top and got the takedown, besides keeping control. He wasn't landing much damage, wasn't doing submission attempts. Seemed like he could have done an arm triangle or really went for something, but he was just settling with the positioning, which after a couple losses, maybe that makes sense. But Lane's last outing, he was able to get a takedown early as well, and he gassed himself out. So I was worried about that happening. That's kind of why I swayed my decision to Robellis. But this time he was able to keep it up for 15 minutes. I do think Robellis played a hand in that because he did not fight from his back. He wasn't trying to get up. He wasn't throwing submissions. I mean, the guy is still kind of clueless from his back. But Austin Lane picking up a UFC victory to get back on track. Statistically, Austin landed 78 total strikes, only 23 of them significant, a lot of pitter-patter from up top. He did get 3 takedowns, although 8 attempts. So I guess you can credit Robellis less than 50% for defending those. But he did have 8 minutes and 58 seconds of control time, so almost 2 entire rounds. And Robellis landed 48 total strikes, 31 of them significant. So 30 less total and 8 more significant. But again, Austin ends that 2-fight losing streak. He starts a new winning streak. He is 3-2-1 since 2022. And Robellis extends his losing streak to 2. He is now 1-2 in the UFC. Really not too sure where he's going to go from here. But for Austin Lane, I think Walker would be a good opponent. And Robellis, maybe he could try to get back on track against Muhammad Usman. But 2 brutal losses. Anyone's going to grapple him. He's going to have to work on that. Ideally a fighter like that needs time in the gym, but because of his age, he doesn't have time. So maybe they find a striking specific fighter, but there's not, a deep pool in the heavyweight division. Moving on, a fight I did get right, although maybe not deservedly so. But we had Gene Matsumoto with a unanimous decision over Brad Katona. And this fight was an all-out war, very high-paced fight through the entire 3 rounds. And Gene, he was looking for takedowns in round 1, which Brad is pretty good with his grappling. Brad was not having that, and he actually landed more strikes because of Gene trying to close the distance. But rounds 2 and 3, both fighters got takedowns, but Gene did land more striking volume, the more significant and damaging strikes, and that's why I do think he was able to steal the victory. But maybe off on volume, I didn't watch the fight back. It was so close, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave it to Brad. But Brad's always in these very close decisions. It wasn't a split, it was a unanimous, so the judges saw it the same way. But very brutal loss for Brad, and Gene, pretty quality win for him. Statistically, Brad landed 117 total strikes, 89 of them significant. He had 3 takedowns and 8 attempts, so pretty solid defense by Katona. And he had 3 minutes and 35 seconds of control time. Now, Gene landed 109 total, 89 of them significant. He only had 1 takedown and 7 attempts, and 2 minutes and 4 seconds of control time. So Brad had a little bit more control time, had more success with his grappling, did well defending, as Gene was only 1 for 7. He landed about 10 more total strikes, the same amount significant. I will say, watching the fight, Gene landed the more significant and damaging shots, but the volume is debatable that Brad could have won that fight. Either way, Brad starts a new losing streak. He's an even 2-2 in the UFC in his second stint, post-second UFC Ultimate Fighter Championship. And Gene stays undefeated. He extends his winning streak to 16 and moves to 3-0 in the UFC. So what's next? Well, I would love to see Gene take on Daniel Santos, who recently pulled out of the fight this weekend. And Brad can go back to the drawing board and take on Christian Quinones. Moving on. An underdog pick I got wrong, not shocked here. But we had Asu Almabayev with a unanimous decision over Mathus Nicolau. And, Asu took total control of this fight. And Mathus really did not get anything going. He was circling the octagon, fighting at distance and waiting for Asu to close space and try to counter him. But Asu actually threw some strikes to win round 1 early. And in round 2, it was close with the striking volume. But Asu finally got the takedown, which I think stole him the round. And when I say in round 1 there wasn't much going on, it was like 9 strikes to 5. So very, very slow-paced start to the fight. But again, back and forth, probably about 20 strikes each in round 2. Asu got the takedown to take the round. And then round 3, both fighters actually finally went after it. But Asu was leading the dance. He landed the more significant strikes as Matthews was trying to counter more. And he also got the knockdown that really put a stamp on the victory. So Matthews taking a tough loss. You got to fight to win, though. I mean, he just wasn't doing that. I thought he would use his experience and IQ to change it up and be the aggressor, stay at distance. But, pretty poor performance. I mean, statistically, he only landed 38 total strikes, 16 of them significant, over 15 minutes. I mean, less than 15 strikes around. That's just not good. He was 0 for 1 in takedowns and had 1 submission attempt. And Asu landed 55 total strikes, 22 of them significant. He only had 1 takedown in 6 attempts. So you got to credit Nicolau was prepared for the grappling. But it's like, come on, you got to use your striking to your advantage. And then Asu had a knockdown in 5 minutes and 17 seconds of control time. So almost an entire round. But much like Gene Matsumoto, Asu is rolling. He extends his win streak to a very, very impressive 17, 4-0 in the UFC, and he moves up 7 spots in the rankings to number 7. Welcome to the top 10, Asu Almabayev. And Matthews extends his losing streak to 3. He is 2-3 since 2022 and moves down 3 spots in the rankings to number 10. So where does Asu go next? I think a fight with Alex Perez would be good. A lot of the top of the division's booked up. And for Matthews, how about Tagir Ulanbekov? Get him another grappler after that performance. Hopefully he could come back. He's grappling in ADXC, so I'd assume he's healthy. But going to the main card, we had the Battle of the OGs retirement fight. A fight I did get wrong, but Darren Elkins loves to win this way. In a unanimous decision over Daniel Pineda. This was actually fight of the night. 50 G's for Darren, the Damage Elkins. And much like Darren's nickname says, this was all about the damage taken and Dylan the Damage. I mean, this fight played out about how you would expect. Daniel was the better, crisper striker, but Darren just is able to take all the hits. Like I said, he's like Rocky, take all the damage, and just wear his opponent out by beating him up. But he was able to steal rounds 2 and 3 with his grappling and control, and really just by tiring Pineda out to try to finish him. Now, Pineda put it all on the line, landed a ton of massive shots, cut Darren Elkins open, but it wasn't enough. I mean, a lot of fighters he would have finished. He had some really deep guillotines. He probably went for the gilly too many times, but he gassed out going for the finish. After the fight with the losing skid, called it a UFC career, announced his retirement, and put his gloves in the octagon. I mean, this is an underrated fighter who puts on collision course fights that are always phenomenal. And I think we should give him a little bit of love here. Looking at his career, I mean, the guy had been everywhere. Had about 10 pro fights, went to Legacy FC, battled in Bellator, although he lost those fights. Back to Legacy FC, put a winning streak together all the way back to 2012, over 12 years ago, already 20 pro fights. And then earned his UFC contract, struggled early, not a lot of quality wins, so went back to the Legacy FC, stacked up 3 wins, went through Bellator, up and down career, hit the LFA, then Fury FC, then PFL, which he had actually won the fights, but they were overturned to banned substances. And then came back to the UFC, and I mean, we had a fight of the night twice, performance of the night twice, and his second UFC stint. But the guy has been everywhere. He's a dog, and he put on one hell of a show. Final career, 28-17. I mean, 45 professional fights. What a career. Statistically, Darren landed 102 total strikes, 39 of them significant. He only had 3 takedowns in 12 attempts. So credit again to Pineda there. He did have a reversal and 6 minutes and 33 seconds of control time. Daniel himself landed 61 total strikes, 31 of them significant. He had 2 submission attempts, a reversal, and 3 minutes and 2 seconds of control time. So you could see Darren just completely gassed out Pineda as the fight went on and ended up with quite a bit more volume. So Darren now extends his winning streak to 2. He is 3-1 since 2022. Who would have thunk a 40-year-old fighter getting a revival of his career and would be 3-1 in a couple of years? And he talked about not wanting to be done. He's actually inspired by his son taking on mixed martial arts. So we're going to see more from the damage and see who could hang and actually try to finish the guy. Now, Daniel ends his career on a losing streak of 3. He was only 1-3 since 2022. So where does Darren go next? I do think he deserves an upper level opponent. You know, there's only the top 15 rankings, but guys that are, you know, in the upper maybe 25-30. So how about a fight with Kyle Nelson, who's coming off a tough loss? I think that's the one to make. If you want to watch what a blue-collar guy does that, no offense to Darren Elkins, probably didn't have a lot of options once he found fighting in life, who just goes out there and outworks people, out-hearts, out-determines, just fucking perseveres. Go watch some Darren Elkins fights, man. I mean, you can't discredit the guy. You love to see it. Heart of a goddamn warrior, and I'm always going to keep watching Darren Elkins. That's what makes the UFC great. Guys like that don't make it to professional sports, MLB, NBA, NHL, NFL, but the UFC, they have a chance, and it's all by literally just hard work, grit, and determination. That is the epitome of Darren Elkins. That's why I love UFC. That's why I love covering it, would love to be a part of it, because these are everyday people that have an opportunity. I don't recommend it as a career by any means, but it gives people an opportunity. Very, very awesome stories here. Then we had Charles Johnson with the unanimous decision over Sumideri, a fight I got right. And this fight was a fun back and forth striking battle. Sumideri, he's kind of been up and down. He's only in his late 20s, not even in his prime yet. But I felt like today Charles Johnson was the better fighter, and that's exactly what we saw. But we did see a ton of improvement from Sumideri. But Charles in this fight was typically the aggressor, bringing the fight to Sumideri. And Sumideri was pretty good with the counter-striking, and he was down to brawl and let the hands fly. Charles actually had to go to his grappling bag in this fight to secure victory because Sumideri was landing pretty well himself. And Sumideri did a decent job at defending takedowns and getting back up quickly, which made the fight pretty evenly contested and made Charles really dig deep. Now, I think he should have been more aggressive with his own offensive attack, but showed a ton of growth as he's nearing his prime. Well done by both men. Another win stacked up for Charles Johnson. Now, statistically, Charles landed 84 total strikes, 65 of them significant. He had 2 takedowns in 6 attempts. So again, credit Sumideri for the defense. He had a knockdown and 2 minutes and 58 seconds of control time. Now, Sumideri landed 78 total, so only 6 less. 75 of them significant, so he actually landed 10 more significant, but he was 0 for 3 in his own takedown attempts. He did have 2 submission attempts, a reversal, and 50 seconds of control time. He was in there, he was battling, he was making 50-50 positions and making it a scrap. Now, Charles extends his winning streak to 4. He is 7-4 since 2022. He enters the top 15 at 15 coming into the new week. And Sumideri extends his losing streak to 3. He hasn't won since January of 2021. He's taken tough fights. He's improving. He's on his way. And I'm excited to see where he goes from here. So what is next? Well, I didn't realize Charles would be in the top 15. And I thought he would earn a fight in the top 15. My original thought was him and Matt Schnell. would be fun because, again, a lot of the divisions booked up, but Chanel fell out of the rankings, but Charles is always down. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. And for Sumaderi, how about I scrap with Ode Osborne, who is also on a 3-fight losing streak. The winner stays alive in the UFC. Then to the big two. What a goddamn performance. I picked against him, but golly, am I proud of this victory. Rob Font with the unanimous decision over Kyler Phillips. Now, people that don't know Kyler Phillips, he is a legit fighter and is absolutely going to be a problem for quite some time in the bantamweight division. But Rob showcased that he is still today cream of the crop. He is better today, and his crisp boxing isn't going anywhere anytime soon. He has been working with the new gym. He's improved his grappling ability, and the whole package was on display in this fight. Now, Kyler, he wanted to test the grappling of Rob right away. He got a takedown pretty quickly in round 1 and controlled Rob for the entire round. So this was kind of like, okay, Rob still needs to work on this. It seems like Kyler might kind of coast to a path to victory. But round 2, Rob made it his fight. He was able to work and get back up to his feet. He pushed the pace against a guy who goes 0 to 100, is a cardio machine, but he was able to have more stamina and more energy to put it on Kyler with his striking and win round 2 to make it 1-1. And a winner takes all round 3. That's what you love to see. Well, round 3, it seemed like Kyler was definitely tiring here from all the takedown attempts that he was trying to do. He couldn't hang with the boxing of Rob in close, so he wanted to wrestle to try to control him, tire him out, or maybe look for a submission, and it just wasn't working. Because when he did get Rob down, Rob was up to his feet and would end up boxing up Kyler. Also, Kyler was spending a lot of energy with his kicks, so it took away from his kicking game in the back half of the fight. Didn't allow for him to do some of those non-traditional come at you matrix style shots, and that really played into Rob's favor. Statistically, Rob landed 65 total, 61 of them significant. He was 0 for 1 in his own takedowns, and he had 1 minute and 19 seconds of control time. Now, Kyler, he landed 50 total strikes, 38 of them significant, and he was 4 for 5 in takedown attempts. So Rob had 15 more total, almost doubled the significant output. But Kyler, 4 takedowns in 5 attempts. Again, the first one, beautiful, executed. The other ones, Rob got back up, and it just wore on him. But in the first round, he did have 4 minutes and 42 seconds of control time. So Rob ends his 2-fight losing streak, starts a new winning streak. It has to feel good for Rob Font because he's only 2-3 since 2022. But he does move up 1 spot in the rankings to number 9. And Kyler ends his 3-fight winning streak. He does start a new losing streak, and he stays put in the rankings at number 12. Well, there's never a lack of opponents in the bantamweight division. I would love to see Rob take on Henry Cejudo. He's still in the rankings. He's still there. Let's just book him up. Let's get this guy active. And Kyler, he could have an absolute banger taking on another striker in Montel Jackson. But this evening was all about Anthony Fluffy Hernandez with a round 5 TKO over Michel Pereira. Performance of the night, 50 G's to Anthony. And, much like the Darren Elkins fight, this one played out how you would expect as well. It's just funny, when they booked this fight, who knows whose real specific idea this was. Sean Shelby, Mick Maynard, somebody else. But it's like, yeah, let's have Michel Pereira as the headliner to a 5-round fight. It'll be great. That's never going to be great. I was talking to this MMA Twitter group chat I have for this Survivor Eliminator. Lots of people that are pretty well known on social media, on Twitter and X for MMA. And I was like, yeah, great idea to have Michel Pereira in a 5-round fight. But in the specifics of this fight, clearly, Michel is going to be the stronger, bigger, and more powerful fighter. But it's not going to be enough all the time unless he could finish his opponents. And that's exactly what played into Fluffy's hands. This fight was a lot like this Khamzat Robert Whittaker fight, in my opinion. Can Anthony survive round one? Can he avoid the powerful onslaught that Michel would provide? And it was really testy there for a second. Michel landed a shot that landed what you think would be like a game-changing, fight-altering liver kick. Anthony visibly showed that he was hurt, kind of, scrunched down, and Michel never attacked it again. Anthony was like, oh shit, that hurt, let me close distance. He clinched and just kind of somehow lingered throughout the fight to close distance and survive the round. Clearly down the round from the onslaught, you're like, okay, Michel, his team, they're going to be like, attack that body. And they didn't. The rest of the fight, Michel didn't look to attack it, and he just kept getting taken down. He was grinded out against the cage, and I'm assuming after 5 minutes of being controlled by Anthony in round two, at that point he was completely gassed. His mind wasn't there what to do strategically. He was just trying to survive. I mean, Anthony completely dominated from here on out. He had full mount multiple times. He was landing nasty ground and pound. Each round, it looked like he might get a finish a couple times. But Michel's tough as nails. He couldn't get Michel out of there until he was completely gassed in round 5. And he did get a TKO. But it was funny because at one point Michel was so tired that after round 3, his corner actually told him, hey, don't use any energy in round 4. Just rest and recover. I'm like, man, you're going into round 4 of a championship round fight. Like, what kind of advice is that? Sure, your fighter is completely gassed and tired, but maybe let's give him a game plan to allow some recovery and stuff. Just don't do anything. Don't use your energy. I mean, that's the story of Michel Pereira wrapped up for you. What a performance by Fluffy, though, because Michel Pereira is a savage. But you can't just live on the hope of finishing someone in 10 minutes. Now, statistically, very, very lopsided here. Anthony landed 209 total strikes, 152 of them significant, and he had 10 takedowns in 29 attempts, and 15 minutes and 42 seconds of control time. So more than 3 rounds. Now, Michel only landed 29 total strikes, 24 of them significant. I mean, Anthony put more than 200, total strikes than him. But he did have a submission attempt, a reversal, and he was 0 for 1 in takedown attempts himself. All but 12 of those strikes from Michel were in the first round. So he had 12 strikes from rounds 2 to 5. Again, completely tired, was just trying to survive. You got to give him credit for his toughness, I guess. But Michel now puts an end to that very impressive 8-fight winning streak. He does start a new losing streak, and he is 5-1 since 2022. He does stay at 14 in the rankings. Now, Anthony extends his winning streak to 6. He's a very good 5-0 since 2022, and he moves up 1 spot in the rankings to number 12. So what's next? Well, I think Anthony deserves somebody that's been the cream of the crop. We have a former contender in Marvin Vettori. He should be down to fight Fluffy. That seems very fitting stylistically. And for Michel, let's get him another fun one. Let's give him another brute striker. Let's give him Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez. Could you imagine Gregory Rodriguez, Michel Pereira? We gotta make that happen. But yeah, solid little Apex card. Again, Rob Font, Fluffy putting on a show. Either way, we don't need to beat around the bush. This Saturday morning, 7 a.m. Pacific, get your coffee, maybe a little Irish coffee, whatever you need to do. Sadly, I have movers coming. I have bought the pay-per-view ahead of time so I can rewatch it. Maybe I'll catch some fights here and there. But again, prelims 7 a.m. Pacific, main card 11 a.m. Pacific, ESPN Plus pay-per-view. Abu Dhabi, this is one hell of a card. You got your Saturday football as well. You got the World Series starting this weekend. You got NBA in action. You got NHL in action. It's a sports paradise. The NFL trade deadline coming up. The election coming up. Woo-wee! But to preview 308, the main and the co-main, both 5-rounders, by the way, although there's not a title on the line in the Whitaker-Khamzat fight, this is some of the most anticipated matchups I've had in the UFC for a long time, especially this year. And the Whitaker fight's even more intriguing because Khamzat pulled out earlier this year, so we've had to wait a little bit longer. But the rest of the main card, I believe, is fireworks. The prelims are really solid as well. just as good as a high-level Apex card. There's some legends on the card, some very skilled fighters that you just want to see more of. So I do expect 308 to be fantastic. It's a must-watch war, worth the pay-per-view. I'm previewing this an 8 out of 10. And again, it's really, really hard for me to preview cards 9 or 10 out of 10 because of UFC 299 and UFC 300 that were absolutely like generational cards. But regardless, some good fights that we will not be breaking down. To be honest, the biggest bummer of this card is probably that Nursultan Ruziboev is withdrawing against Rinat Fakhretdinov. That fight would have been absolutely bonkers. But Rinat is now fighting LFA champion Carlos Leal. That should be still a quality fight. We have Brave alum Ismail Nardiev taking on Bruno Silva. So that should be a violent scrap. And then sadly, Saeed Nurmagomedov is pulled out in this fight, or he didn't pull out. Daniel Santos pulled out against him, so this fight is canceled because they could not find a short notice opponent to be overseas. And I'm sure they could find someone, but Saeed probably didn't want him. But let's kick this sucker off. In the prelims, we got a pretty heavy favorite here. We have Farid Ferocious Basharat, 27 years old with an undefeated 12-0 record, taking on Victor Striker Hugo, 31 years old with a 25-4 record. Now here we get another chance to see the undefeated Farid in action, and he's taking on a man who's in his prime, looking to make a stamp in the UFC while he's in his prime, against a very highly known young prospect. You want to boost your career, a victory here does the trick. Breaking this down, Farid is an orthodox fighter. He trains out of Extreme Couture. He's a Contender Series alum. Again, he's undefeated on a 12-fight winning streak, 4-0 in the UFC. 6 of his 12 wins are via submission, and all 5 of his losses are via knockout. Now, Victor is a Contender Series alum. He's on a 14-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC. 10 of his 25 wins are via submission, 7 via knockout, so 17 of his 25 wins via finish. And 2 of his 4 losses are via knockout. Now, both men, they're full of confidence right now. You know, Victor especially has a lot on the line with a big jump in competition while he's in his prime window. The time is now. So again, if he could take advantage, he will make a big leap in the UFC. But honestly, Farid, although he's younger, I thought he's fought better competition in the professional regional scene, and especially in the UFC. I expect this fight to be closer than the odds suggest, but Farid winning this fight with his pace, his volume, and his grappling. Although Victor does have good BJJ, I am saying that Farid stays undefeated. We are putting him on that parlay. We marking that ish down, and we getting that bread. Moving on. We have Kennedy, the African Savage, and Nshekwu. He's 32 years old with a 12-5 record, taking on Chris Beast Boy Barnett, 38 years old with a 23-8 record. Now, Chris was supposed to fight Junior Tafa a couple weeks ago, but he withdrew for not being able to travel due to the Florida hurricanes. And now he's getting in, taking stiffer competition on. And, you know, Kennedy's in his prime, and he's hungrier than ever to get things back on track with his skid. So both men I expect to go for the finish, so it should make for a fun stylistic showdown for myself and you as the fans. Breaking this down, Kennedy trains out of Fortis MMA. He is a 2-time Contender Series and LFA alum. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, 3-3 since 2022. 8 of his 12 wins are via knockout, and he has a massive 8-inch reach advantage and 8-inch leg reach advantage. Now, Chris has a Taekwondo, wrestling, and judo background. He's an XFC, Island Fights, and Risen alum. He's on a 1-fight winning streak, but he hasn't fought since 2022. He pulled out of fights 3 times, and in 2022, he was 1-1. 18 of his 23 wins are via knockout. Now, Chris, at this point, he's a wild card. I mean, his style and his size and shape, he's a wild card in general. But I do expect Kennedy to be too sharp, using his length to keep big, powerful shots from Chris away. He does crazy spinning kicks and things like that. And I just think he's going to be really focused after 2 losses to come up with a game plan. Hopefully he doesn't get overzealous and do too much. Maybe he could just, stick with the jabs and kicks, outpoint them, find his openings when they connect. But I do not expect this fight to go to the scorecards. If it does, I expect Kennedy to outpoint him from distance. For that reason, I'm taking the African Savage, Kennedy and Shekaku. I am putting them on that parlay. We marking that ish down, and we getting that bread. Moving on. We have Bruno the Hulk Ferreira, 31 years old with a 12-1 record, taking on Abus Magomedov, 34 years old with a 26-6 record. Now, this is an interesting fight. We have 2 men in their primes, 34 and 31, who have shown really good glimpses that they could be a problem in the UFC in this division, and they've had their moments. But they haven't been in the UFC for very long, so a win here really puts them on a good path, especially for Bruno. Abus, since he's been in the UFC, has completely been thrown in the deep end to see if he could swim. I don't think he could swim. He has shown that he really doesn't belong there. And Bruno has surprised, as he wasn't expected to do much, and he has done very well against stiff competition post his Contender Series victory. Breaking it down, Bruno is a Contender Series alum. He's on a 2-fight winning streak, 4-1 in the UFC. 9 of his 12 wins are via knockout, 3 via submission. So all 12 of his wins come via finish. That's why he's the Hulk. Now, Abus is a PFL and KSW alum. He's on a 1-fight winning streak, 2-2 in the UFC. 14 of his 26 wins are via knockout, 6 via submission. So 20 of his 26 wins via finish. He is rocking a 6-inch reach advantage and a 4-inch leg reach advantage. Personally, if I take a step back to think about how this plays out, I expect Abus to mix in grappling in this fight because I think Hulk's going to show that he does have good striking, he's powerful, and he usually comes in pretty aggressive early. I do think he is the better striker, so Abus's path to victory would be to grapple. I don't think he's going to be able to take Bruno down and continually hold him there. For that reason, I'm taking the underdog. I'm taking Bruno Ferreira. We are putting him on that parlay. We marking that ish down, and we getting that bread. The Hulk as a dog is coming to eat. Ho, ho. Moving on, we have Matush Chinzik Rebecki, 32 years old with a 19-2 record, taking on Miktebek Oralbai, 26 years old with a 13-1 record. Man, Mateusz got absolutely mollywopped and destroyed by Diego Ferreira back in May, which isn't really that long ago. And now he's faced up against a very tough up-and-comer who has amazing MMA grappling. And Rebecki is looking to get back on track. He's in his prime at 32. But Oralbai is looking to continue to stack up names in his resume, as he's really impressed in his 2 UFC fights since the LFA, and he's already fought very stiff competition. Breaking this down, Mateusz trains out of American Top Team. He's a Contender Series alum. He's on a 1-fight winning streak, but he is 4-1 in the UFC. 9 of his 17 wins are via knockout, 7 via submission, so 16 of his 19 wins via finish. And both of his losses are via knockout. Now, Miktebek is a PFL and LFA alum. He's on an 8-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC, and he trains out of Team Alpha Male. 6 of his 13 wins are via knockout, 5 via submission, so 11 of his 13 wins via finish. Now, he's rocking an 8-inch reach advantage and a 3-inch leg reach advantage. Now, Mateusz is a solid fighter, but I do think Oralbai will be able to hang with him on the feet and will be looking for takedowns early and often. We just haven't seen anyone be able to stop his offensive attack yet. And Rebecki, he trains with a bunch of studs and grapplers at American Top Team. They have a plethora of grapplers to train with. I just think Oralbai is too skillful at this point, and he's going to find a way to victory. For that reason, I am taking Miktebek. We are also putting him on that parlay. We marking that ish down, and we getting that bread. Moving on. What a fun one we have here in the prelim headliner. We have Jeff Hands of Steel Neal, 34 years old with a 15-6 record and the number 10 next to his name, taking on Rafael Dos Anjos, 39 years old with a 32-16 record and the number 14 next to his name. Now, I'm not too sure why RDA went up. I'm assuming at damn near 40, the weight cut might be a little brutal. But we have to give him props. RDA has been there. He has miles on him. He's taken all these fights. 48 professional fights. And he is still fighting at a high level. I think this fight is going to be so much fun because both men have been putting on high-level, action-packed fights, not boring fights for years. Although RDA likes to grapple, he mixes it in. He's aggressive. He's offensive. He tries to go for the finish. And Jeff, he's a striker first. And RDA is very well-rounded, really everywhere. So it's going to be interesting to see if Jeff can avoid the takedowns and, avoid losing a round here by being controlled by RDA's wrestling and grappling. Now, Jeff, he trains out of Fortis MMA. He has a purple belt in BJJ. 2 of his last 3 fights have been fight of the night or performance of the night. Like I said, styles make fights. Jeff shows up, he shows out. He's a Legacy FC, LFA, and Contender Series alum. He's on a 2-fight losing streak and is only 1-2 since 2022. 9 of his 15 wins are via knockout. Jeff does have a little length. He's got a 5-inch reach advantage and a 3-inch leg reach advantage. He is going to be quite a bit bigger fighter here. Now, RDA has a BJJ style. He has a 4th degree black belt. The guy is insane. He also has a black Prajit in Muay Thai. He won gold in the 2003 World Jiu-Jitsu Championships. He's the former UFC lightweight champion with 1 successful title defense. He's been bouncing from lightweight to welterweight, choosing to fight at welterweight again. He has the longest total fight time in UFC history at 8 hours, 41 minutes, and 49 seconds. Could you imagine the damage your body would take after fighting the best of the world for almost 9 hours? It's absolutely bonkers. He's the first and only fighter to reach 8 hours of fight time in UFC history. He's tied with Bilal Muhammad for the most unanimous decision wins in UFC history at 11. He's tied with Francisco Trinaldo for the most unanimous decision wins in UFC lightweight history at 7. He has the most decision bouts in UFC history at 22. He's a Fury FC alum. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. He's been active, though, damn near 40. He's 2-3 since 2022, with 2 fights at welterweight, 3 at lightweight. 11 of his 32 wins are via submission, and 4 of his 16 losses are via knockout. Now, although Jeff has not won since 2022, he's looked very good as well. He looked good in the last fight against Ian Machado Gary. I thought he almost won the fight. He hasn't had to fight a grappler like RDA in quite some time. The best comparison is against Neil Magny, who's kind of more of a grinder and a clinch artist. But he is really going to get pushed to see if he can fight with those powerful strikes for the entire 15 minutes and continue to defend takedowns. I do think RDA is going to be too powerful. I think he's going to exhaust Neil because he's just going to put a pace on him. I do obviously think there is a chance that the younger, more powerful Jeff catches him with a knockout, but I'm not betting on that. The only person to finish RDA recently was Rafael Fiziev at the very, very end of a 5-round fight that he was winning in 2022. And before that, it was Eddie Alvarez in 2016. For that reason, I think RDA gets another dub, man. We're going with the underdog. We are putting him on that parlay. We're not putting him on a parlay. This is a tough fight. But the dog's coming to eat. Love to see it. RDA, what a stud, man. Speaking about studs, the rest of this main card is absolutely box office. Kicking it off, we have Shara Bullet Magomedov, 30 years old, with an undefeated 14-0 record, taking on Armin Superman Petrosian, 33 years old with a 9-3 record. Now, this fight is just a fun striking showdown. This should end up being a finish and being a war. But both men are very skilled, really as kickboxers. Great kicks, great boxing, and they have shown flashes of their potential in the UFC already. Now, Arman, really there's only an issue in the UFC has been against grapplers, but he's not going to have to worry about that in this fight at all. And Shara hasn't had to deal with that yet, but he's going to love showing off his striking ability. Now, both men are in their primes at 30 and 33. This is a great way to start the pay-per-view, and both men are going to get a lot of eyes on them, a great way to boost their careers in their prime. Breaking this down, Shara has a Muay Thai style. His last 2 fights have been fight of the night or performance of the night. He's showing up, he's showing out. Again, he's undefeated on a 14-fight winning streak, 3-0 in the UFC, and 11 of his 14 wins are via knockout. Now, Arman has a Muay Thai and kickboxing style. He's a Contender Series alum. He's on a 1-fight losing streak and is 4-2 in the UFC. 6 of his 9 wins are via knockout. Now, I am surprised Shara is the favorite here. He hasn't really been tested. He isn't super technical and clean, although he has very, very good skills and speed and kicks. It's not technical. It's very unorthodox. Now, Arman is very technical. He has defeated really good strikers like Christian Leroy Duncan and Gregory Rodriguez. And it's going to be interesting to see if Shara could keep the pace with Arman for 15 minutes because he does do so much volume. If he doesn't get a he kind of finish. He has been known to gas himself out. For that reason, I'm taking another underdog to begin the pay-per-view. I'm taking Arman Petrosyan. I'm not putting him on a parlay, but Superman as a dog is coming to eat. Hoo hoo. Moving on, these fights got flipped around, but we'll stick with it. It's actually the Dan Ige fight, then the Magomed fight. But we got Magomed Ankalaev, 32 years old with a 19-1-1 record and the number 2 next to his name, taking on Aleksandar Rocket Rakic, 32 years old with a 14-4 record and the number 5 next to his name. The main card opener is pretty solid. But the rest of this card, I am absolutely fucking excited for the rest of it. I mean, Rakic has been ravaged by injuries, but he is an athletic specimen, man. He has some serious explosion and power. He did get caught in a firefight in his last battle against Yuri, and he wasn't able to hang. Besides the knee injury against Jan Blachowicz, he's looked really solid, and he's in his prime. He's healthy now. Supposedly, he was on some medication in that Yuri fight, which had affected his cardio. But Magomed is a really well-rounded fighter. I'm not sure why he gets so much hate. I enjoy his fights because he is so skilled. A win here should get him to the title. Supposedly, Magomed said that Dana White told him it has to be a good fight. Regardless, this guy deserves to fight against Alex Pereira, especially with the win here, because, he needs a little bit of momentum. A guy in his prime, the promotion's kind of slapping you around. Maybe he'd want to leave or something because he's had a no contest. He's had a draw that he's had to battle through. I think we will see the best of Magomed Ankalaev here as well. Breaking it down, Magomed has a combat sambo style. He won gold in the 2016 Combat Sambo Championships. He's on a 10-fight winning streak. He did have the no contest and draw in there. So he is 3-0 with 2 no contests or draws since 2022. And 10 of his 18 wins are via knockout. Now, Alexander trains out of ATT. He has a brown belt in BJJ. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, but he had to recover from a knee injury that had him out for 2 years as well. 9 of his 14 wins are via knockout, and 2 of his 4 losses are via knockout. So to knock out or be knocked out. And he's also rocking a 3-inch reach advantage. Now, in Rakic's fight against Yuri, he absolutely destroyed Yuri's leg until he got knocked out. And I expect in this fight both men to utilize kicks at a high clip and lower leg kicks. I do think Magomed does have the overall technical striking advantage here, but he's nicknamed the Rocket for a reason. This dude has serious power, and he probably will have the speed advantage. But due to this, I think Magomed will mix in the grappling early and often to control this fight. For that reason, I'm taking Magomed Ankalaev. I'm avoiding him on a parlay. This is one hell of a fucking fight. Now moving on. We have Lerone the Miracle Murphy, 33 years old with a undefeated 14-0-1 record and the number 12 next to his name. Taking on Dan 50K Ige, 33 years old with an 18-8 record and the number 14 next to his name. Now this is another absolute banger between two studs in their primes with the opportunity to jump in the top 10 of the division while they're at their peak of their fighting career and make life-changing money. Now, Lerone was really untested in the UFC until May when he put together a 5-round masterpiece against a legend in Edson Barboza. But Dan, he really has been like the cream of the crop in this division and has been fighting the best this division has to offer for years. The striking exchanges that I could see taking place in this fight are going to be fantastic. I do expect Lerone to have the speed advantage, but Dan potentially with the power. Both men have good grappling abilities, but I almost think Lerone will be the one to maybe utilize that in a fight because Dan never seems to want to do it. Breaking it down, Lerone trains out of Manchester Top Team. He has a blue belt in BJJ. He's undefeated on a 14-fight winning streak, but he did have a draw in his UFC debut. He's 3-0 since 2022. And 7 of his 14 wins are via knockout. Now, Dan trains out of Extreme Couture MMA. He has a black belt in BJJ, a brown belt in Judo. He has a D2 wrestling background at a Wartburg College. And he's been around. He's an RFA, Legacy FC, Cage Fury, Titan FC, and Contender Series alum. He is on a 1-fight winning streak and is an even 3-3 since 2022. 6 of his 18 wins are via knockout, 5 via submission, so 11 of his 18 wins via finish. But looking at it, I mean, I actually had picked Lerone before I broke this down. But what it comes down for me is Dan and his team is going to come in prepared with a brilliant game plan. I think Extreme Couture, headlined by Eric Nixick and that team, the best in the game. He kind of sees Dan as a son as you looked at what happened in that short notice fight against Diego Lopez. And again, Dan doesn't leverage his wrestling. He hasn't used it in a long time. He's really strictly been a boxer, so I'd assume he continues that trend. Lerone, though, again, he hasn't fought as stiff competition, but he has leveraged his takedowns and grappling against the better fighters and strikers. But Dan's really good there defensively. So that might be the difference. Is if Lerone could get takedowns and hold him and tire him, maybe he wins. If he doesn't, Dan's going to win. Both men absolutely are willing to exchange. Again, I think Murphy is going to have the speed advantage, but I'm not sure that he's going to have very good defensive striking, and it's going to look a lot like the Rob Font-Kyler Phillips fight. So I think Dan's going to have his openings. I also do think Dan is going to be hungrier than ever to get back on track after that Diego Lopez fight. And with what Diego Lopez has done, I think that builds the confidence to show the potential that he has. So that reason, I'm switching my decision here. I do think Dan finds a way to win with his fighting experience and the coach on his team. For that reason, I'm taking another underdog. I'm saying Dan Ige with the 50K bonus. I'm not putting him on a parlay, but Ige's coming to eat as a dog. Ho, ho. Now, Abu Dhabi is going to go absolutely bonkers for this one. Was booked in June. We're finally getting it. July, August, September. 4 months later, we're getting Robert the Reaper Whitaker. 33 years old with a 27-7 record and the number 3 next to his name. Taking on Khamzat Bors Chimaev. 30 years old with an undefeated 13-0 record and the number 12 next to his name. Knock on wood, I don't want to jinx this, but any Khamzat fight, I don't believe it till we see it, especially with the weight cut. But we're finally getting this showdown. The anticipation has been real. This was scheduled for June, but with Khamzat's illness, it didn't get to happen. Robert has always been the man in this division. He just couldn't solve the Israel Adesanya puzzle, which is a generational talent. And then, of course, DDP really took it to him for real everywhere. but he's looked great in his other fights since 2022, and I think DDP reawoken a monster in him. Now, Khamzat has absolutely rolled through everyone, but Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman showed he isn't invincible. They were very close fights, very close for Gilbert and Kamaru to get decision victories. But with Khamzat, it's really about him putting a high pace on them earlier and, seeing if his opponents can weather the storm. In this fight, I do think Robert is going to have the striking advantage, but I'm not confident Khamzat will be able to take Robert down, and when he does, hold him there. That's a huge advantage for Robert if he can avoid that. Breaking it down, Robert has a black belt in Hapkido, Karate, and BJJ. He does have a wrestling background as he wrestled for the Australian national team. He's the former middleweight champion and interim champion. He's the first Australian to win a UFC championship and the first New Zealand-born fighter to win a UFC championship. He's also an Ultimate Fighter alum and champion. He was the 2018 Fight of the Year against Yoel Romero in their second one. He was the 2017 Male Fighter of the Year. He's a Legend FC alum. He's on a 2-fight winning streak and is 3-2 since 2022. 10 of his 26 wins are via knockout. 3 of his 7 losses are also via knockout. So to knock out or be knocked out. And he does have a 3-inch leg reach advantage. Now, Khamzat has a brown belt in BJJ. 5 of his last 7 fights have been fight of the night or performance of the night. He shows up, he shows out. He has a record for the fastest consecutive wins in modern UFC history at 10 days, and the record for quickest 3-fight win streak in modern UFC history at 66 days. Because of that, he was the 2020 Breakthrough Fighter of the Year. He's a Brave alum, undefeated on a 13-fight winning streak, 3-0 since 2022. 6 of his 13 wins are via knockout, 5 via submission, so 11 of his 13 wins via finish. I don't think it's a surprise. I expect Khamzat to go 0-100 and bet on himself to get a finish of Robert in the first 10 minutes. But if he doesn't, Robert, which I don't think he does, Robert is going to get things going from midway probably in the second round through the rest of the fight. I'm sure Khamzat's going to continue to have his moments throughout, but Rob is going to control the dance. He'll be the fresher fighter as it wears on. I'm assuming he's going to be defending takedowns, getting up, and he's going to be the better striker. Khamzat's a finisher, but Robert has only been finished by Izzy and DDP, besides Wonder Boy all the way back in 2014. And Chimaev is not the striker that those fighters are, in my opinion, and we'll see that on display this weekend. For that reason, I think Robert is just too well-rounded, too good of a striker, too experienced, and he's going to find a way to win. We're taking the underdog, Robert Whittaker. I'm not putting him on a parlay, but the Bobby Knuckles is coming to eat as the underdog. Ho, ho. Then we have the main event of the evening. My history as a fight fan, my first original favorite fighter was Matt Hughes, and then really close after was BJ Penn. I've enjoyed a lot of other fighters over the course of the years, but those two are my OGs. Since then, it really became John Jones at an early time and then the Sugar Show. But one guy that I've always really enjoyed that's dang near up there was Max Holloway. I like Alexander Volkanovski as well. So when Volk would beat Max, it really hurt my heart because I was definitely rooting for Max Holloway. In his last fight for the BMF against Justin Gaethje, which was a mountain of a challenge, I didn't have the confidence and I didn't pick the Blessed Express. But this time we get Max Blessed Holloway, 32 years old, with a 26-7 record and the number 8 next to his name, taking on Ilya El Matador Topuria, 27 years old, with an undefeated 15-0. Now, the build-up for this fight could not be more perfect. Ilya, the young bull, coming in and knocking out the featherweight GOAT in Volkanovski. And Max went up against a stud, hard-hitting lightweight and dominated him over the course of 25 minutes and finished him before the bell rang with this signature and iconic moment that will be ingrained in history at UFC 300. When we take a step back and really look at this fight, It's a really technical boxer who's a hard hitter in Topuria. But he has not fought a guy like Max who could put a pace and volume and movement all together over the course of 25 minutes. Ilya has been known to get a little over-aggressive with his strikes, which kind of opens himself up when he does that, and he gets unbalanced. When he does that, I do think Max is going to take advantage and mix in a strategy with kicks to steal his title back and become another featherweight champion. But breaking it down, Max has a brown belt in BJJ. He's a former featherweight champion and interim champion with 3 successful title defenses. I mean, strap in. The amount of accolades this guy has, one of the best to ever do it, Hall of Famer, no doubt. He has the most finishes and most knockouts in UFC featherweight title fights at 4. The highest significant strike differential in UFC championship history, which was 180 against Brian Ortega. The first American to win the UFC featherweight championship. He's the current UFC BMF. 4 of his last 6 fights have been fight of the night. No performance of the night. It's all fight of the night. The man shows up, he shows out. He's tied with Cub Swanson for most post-fight bonuses in UFC featherweight division history at 10 of them things. He has the longest winning streak in UFC featherweight division history at 13. The most wins in featherweight at 20. The most knockouts at featherweight with 9. The most finishes in UFC featherweight division history at 11. The most significant strikes landed in UFC history at 3,378. He also has the most significant strikes landed in UFC featherweight history at 2,892. So he has the most at featherweight and in the UFC. He also has the most total strikes landed in UFC history at 3,622. And the most total strikes landed in featherweight at 3,096. He has the most total fight time in UFC featherweight division history, 6 hours, 47 minutes, and 23 seconds. And he's only 32, about to be 33. He has the most significant strikes absorbed in UFC history, 2,223. He has the most bouts without being knocked down in UFC history at 29. He has the most bouts with 100 or more significant strikes per fight in UFC history at 16. He's tied with Demetrius Johnson and Yair Rodriguez for the latest finish in UFC history, which was at 4 minutes, 59 seconds in round 5, which was the knockout of Justin Gaethje. He had the latest finish in UFC lightweight division history and is tied for the latest knockout in UFC history, which was with Yair Rodriguez at 4 minutes, 59 seconds in that Gaethje fight. He has the most significant strikes landed in a fight in UFC history at 445 against Calvin Kattar. The highest striking differential in a fight in UFC history, 312 against Kattar. The most significant strikes attempted, which was 744 against Kattar. The most significant strikes attempted in lightweight division history, 446 against Dustin Poirier in their second fight. He has the most significant strikes attempted in a featherweight division history, 744 against Calvin. The most distant strikes landed in a fight in UFC history, 439 against Calvin. He has the most significant head strikes landed in a fight in UFC history, 274 against Calvin. He also has the most significant head strikes landed in featherweight history, which was against Calvin. The most significant body strikes landed in a UFC history, 117 against Calvin, and also in the featherweight division. The most significant body strikes landed in a fight in UFC lightweight division history, 62 against Justin Gaethje. Again, the volume and the pace. Lightweight, featherweight, UFC history, he's got all the records. He has the most total strikes landed in a fight in UFC history and featherweight history at 447 against Qatar. The most total strikes attempted in a fight in UFC history and featherweight history, 746 against Calvin. He has the most total strikes attempted in a UFC title fight, 407 against Brian Ortega, which was hilarious because he was trying to teach him how to counter and box right. He had the most total strikes attempted in a fight in UFC lightweight division history, 473 against Dustin Poirier in their second fight. He has the most total head strikes landed in a fight in UFC featherweight division history, 274 against Qatar. The most leg kicks landed in a fight in UFC lightweight division history, 57 against Justin Gaethje. Most total body strikes landed in a fight in UFC history, 119 against Kattar. The most significant strikes landed in a round in UFC history and in featherweight history, which was 141 in round 4 against Calvin. He had the most significant strikes attempted in a round in UFC featherweight division history, which was 204 in round 3 against Jose Aldo in their second fight. He has the most total strikes landed in a round in UFC featherweight division history, 141 in round 4 against Brian Ortega. He has the most total strikes attempted in a round in UFC featherweight division history, 212 in the second Jose Aldo fight. 217 Fighter of the Year, 2021 Beatdown of the Year against Calvin Kattar. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He has 3-1 since 2022. 12 of his 16 wins are via knockout, and he does have a 5-inch leg reach advantage. Now, Ilya is an orthodox fighter. He has a black belt in BJJ. He's the first Georgian-Spanish champion in UFC history. 4 of his 7 UFC fights have been Performance of the Night or Fight of the Night. He's also showing up, he's showing out, and he's a finisher. 8 of his 15 wins are via submission, 5 via knockout, so 13 of his 15 wins via finish. The intrigue in this fight is hinged on one massive question. Does Ilya look to grapple Max and defend his title that way? If he does, I think he stays the champion, but I think with all the trash talk and the expectations he set out of outclassing him, outboxing him, outstriking him, and knocking him out, Max may have lured him into a dogfight. Max has an iron chin. We talked about all of his accolades and stats. He has never been knocked out in his pro career, so I'm not sure if Ilya is going to be the one to do so. If any of his opponents were to do it, I would have expected Justin Gaethje or maybe Arnold Allen. But if he does do it, he will shock the world and be one of the faces of the UFC. Max hasn't fought a grappling heavy fighter since 2019, and when he did, it was against Frankie Edgar, but he defended 14 of his 15 takedown attempts. So I'm not sure if Ilya is going to be able to really take advantage of that side of the equation, but Ilya, you have to give him credit. He's technical, he's sharp, he's well-rounded. There is definitely opportunities for him, especially if he wins in the early rounds and try to catch Max or put him in a deficit. But I'm betting Max utilizes his movement as well as he always does. He out-IQs Ilya, out-volumes, outpaces him over the course of the 25 minutes to win the fight. My logical mind originally was telling me that Ilya's the guy. But my heart says Max, and I bet against Max against Gaethje. I highly regret it. I'm thinking that was too big of a hill for him to climb, and boy was I wrong. Max continues to improve. We also forget he's only 32, turns 33 in December. He's in the heart of his prime. We're blessed, and for that reason, Max stays blessed and new. I'm taking Max Holloway. I'm not putting him on a parlay, but we have another blessed underdog coming to eat. Ho, ho. UFC 308 Abu Dhabi, Saturday morning. Can't wait. That's episode 71. I can't wait to break it down with you guys next week at 72 in my new house. The move will be over. But next week we have another fight night card, but this one's a solid card in Canada, in Edmonton. The headliner is a fun fight. We get the return of Brandon Moreno taking on Amir Albazi, potentially a title eliminator fight. So back-to-back UFC cards, quality cards. I'm your host, Shane Gillette. Episode 71. We'll see you next week.